what life is like in the AFP series. So yeah, thanks for joining us again. My name's Anna. I am a final year medical student at King's College London, and I also work with Medics.Academy on their S-Docs programme. But that's not the reason I'm here today. The reason I'm here today is because I am thinking about maybe doing the academic foundation programme next year, maybe applying. And I wanted to find out a little bit more about kind of what it was like. So I'm here today with some of my lovely friends who have done AFPs, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about what the AFP is actually like, what you planned, what you're doing, and kind of what you achieved kind of throughout your AFP placement. So it's really cool to have you guys with us. Would you like to introduce yourselves to our lovely audience? I know that some of you have been on before, but it'd be nice to hear from you again. So Dimitri, do you want to go first?
Hi everyone, my name is Dimitrios Karponis and I'm an academic foundation year one in Oxford, currently working in dermatology at the Churchill Hospital, and my academic block is at the end of year two.
Awesome. So we're also joined by George. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, so I'm George. I did my academic foundation programme at St Thomas's Hospital in London. I have subsequently become a public health doctor. I'm now in my ST2 year of my public health training, and I had my academic block at the beginning of my second year in the programme.
Awesome, thank you so much for joining us, George. And we've also joined again by our friend Faris. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name's Faris. I'm one of the academic foundation year one doctors currently in Wales at the moment, and I'm currently on my paediatric block. And because of the structure of the academic component of the foundation year one in Wales, I basically have academic time built throughout the entirety of my F1 year.
Brilliant. And last but very much not least, we've got Nikki. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Nikki. I'm currently doing the AFP block at the moment. I'm an F2, so I've got it first in the year. My AFP is in paediatrics at Imperial College London.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. So I think, first of all, I'd like to hear a little bit from Faris about what it's like actually combining academics with clinical work at the same time, because from what I understand it, most AFPs have like a discrete block for their academic work. But actually, it sounds really interesting that you're doing that alongside your clinical stuff. So yeah, how are you finding that?
Yeah, so it's really interesting the way that it's actually done in Wales. So just to give a brief overview, if you decide to apply to do an academic foundation year one programme in Wales, you get the academic time built in throughout the entirety of the academic year, which practically looks like 1 to possibly 2 days a week dedicated to academic time, or 1 day a fortnight dedicated to academic time. And the whole philosophy, I think, behind that is that you're able to do projects throughout the entirety of your F1 period, and you're able to do a mixture of projects alongside each of the different blocks. So, for example, I'm in paediatrics at the moment, so I'm currently involved in 2 separate audits related to paediatrics, one of which has been going for a number of years, and one of which we're hoping to start up, and that will be continued for the rest of the year, and it will be expected for the other academic doctors to pick up. It does mean, in comparison to what England does, which is dedicating an entire 4-month block, to academic time, it does mean that you sort of have to balance your academic commitments alongside your clinical commitments, which means that you do get, on balance, less time on the wards or less time in the assessment unit. And as I'm sure you're all aware, you'll have a minimum number of competencies that you have to do as part of your F1 and the same for F2 year. And you still have to do all those competencies, but you have less time to do those all in, which is probably the main disadvantage. I know when I was applying, what I also thought was a disadvantage was the fact that it's quite difficult to sort of plan your academic days if they're sort of organised haphazardly. So just to give you some perspective of when my academic days are scheduled with Impede. So I haven't had one this week, but I've got one next week on Tuesday. And then the following week, I've got it on a different day of the week. So that organisation can sometimes be a bit difficult in comparison to having 4 months, which are protected for the academic time. But so far, I've really enjoyed it. I've managed to start a number of different projects. I've managed to do stuff within paediatrics and within medical education in general, which is what I wanted to get out of the year. And I'm quite confident that the other 2 blocks, because I've started to plan what I'm going to do with the academic time already, will be successful as well.
That's really interesting to hear about your experiences. Thank you so much. I think I just wanted to ask Dimitri, because I understand that you're working as an F1, but you haven't started your academic block yet. But do you feel under more pressure to get those clinical competencies because you know that you've got one less rotation than everyone else?
Yeah, so that's a good point. I wouldn't say I feel I'm under more pressure because I think during F1, there's not a lot of things we're expected to do, and I suppose it's similar with F2. I'm not quite sure about that, but there's plenty of time and plenty of opportunities. I think perhaps at a later level, if you have a position in the integrated academic pathway and you're a specialist registrar, then maybe it is an issue, but you have plenty of time as an F1 to complete those competencies.
That's really great to hear. That's quite reassuring, I think, for people watching who are maybe worried about having a bit less time on the wards. So, George, you've completed your academic foundation programme. Did it live up to what you expected it to be like?
That is a fascinating question. I think people go into the academic foundation program with a huge array of different expectations about how it's going to go. And a lot of it does come down to the things we've been discussing already this evening. So it comes down to whether it's going to be in one solid block, which hopefully should be relatively safe from clinical commitments so that you can really get stuck in with what you're doing, or whether it's going to be split over the year, which has the advantage of obviously having the longevity that so many of these complex projects require. I think, obviously, when it comes to the purpose of the academic foundation program, partly it's simply for interest and to cultivate those scientific skills that you can deploy later in your career. Partly, it's obviously a really wonderful opportunity for you to build your CV, to get that ACF perhaps later on down the line, or that specialist registrar position with an interest in research later on down the line. And when you get to that point, you're going to be judged both on how many papers you produce, but also your presentations, but then beyond those, your management skills, your leadership ability. And actually in the 4 months, I would really advise focusing on all of those different elements equally as much as you can, because you've got a wonderful sort of once in a lifetime opportunity to spend a solid 4 month block, working as a doctor in an institution with all these resources available to you to cover so much ground. So in terms of what I expected, I had quite a firm idea in my mind about what I wanted to do. I think the main reason that I felt my AFP went well was because I had a very clear set of research objectives I was trying to hit alongside teaching courses I was giving and management roles I knew I'd be taking on. So I planned in advance, in other words, to make the most of the time. I think the risk can be, if you arrive with not too much idea about what you want to be working on, you can end up spending those sort of first precious month to 2 months trying to conceive of an idea and then leaving yourself only a month or two to actually enact it. So I think in terms of expectations, it did meet my expectations, but primarily because I planned ahead.
That's great. Thank you so much. And just moving on to Nikki, you're in your academic block at the moment. How's that all going?
Yeah, so it is going well so far. It is a bit different doing the academic block at this current point in time because it is a very remote working situation. And you might suspect that most AFPs would be very remote in general, or you'd have that flexibility, but actually it's more so become the case because of the COVID situation that my supervisors, everyone in the research team that I'm working under is also working from home. So my life as a doctor is very different for these 4 months compared to my F1 year. I agree with what George was saying, that there is so much importance in planning in advance what exactly you're going to do. I had a bit of a mixed experience with this, where I planned a project and submitted an ethics application, but because of the COVID pandemic, it got stalled, and then my project sort of had to change course during that time. So I found myself in a bit of a different situation. I think, but primarily I would say the reason why I think it's going well is that I've got a really good supervisor, and I would recommend that everyone who's going through the AFP and who's interested in that is one of the things that you really look for, is someone who is a good supervisor, who's a good mentor to look up to, and who will really guide and support you through the process. So I've been fortunate enough to get another major project that I'm working on at the moment. But the other thing that I really just want to touch upon about the benefit that I'm finding with having this time is, whilst it's quite different, in terms of it's very flexible, it's a lot more home working, there's a lot of opportunities because you have the time to get involved in teaching. So because my AFP is at Imperial, I've been teaching some of the Imperial students, and you have that amazing opportunity to set up teaching programs to really develop yourself in that way. And like George said, there are other opportunities as well in terms of leadership, management, and everything like that. So I think it's just an incredible opportunity to have that time to be able to do that and study for postgrad exams.
That sounds great that you've got so much sort of remote working and stuff. I mean, I suppose it's a very different situation from people who may have done their academic post previously or maybe doing it in the future. But yeah, it's really interesting to hear your reflections. Just going back to George, as someone who has completed their entire academic foundation program. Now, I know that you know, the reason why we should be going through these kind of extra things that we're doing is to develop professionally and personally. But in terms of kind of academic output that you had from the AFP, I know that's very important to people as well, particularly for jobs they want to get in the future. So might you be able to just outline some of the outputs that you had from your research block?
Absolutely. So I was quite lucky, I suppose. So part of what I'm referring to when I'm referring to that benefit from planning in advance is that I had several projects that were already on a good stage of completion before I even started in the AFP. So I was able to, in terms of, to put numbers on it, so I published 6 papers from the 4-month period that I had my AFP block. I ran, I think it was 5 national teaching courses during that time, and then had various management leadership roles in terms of formal ones with the university, lecturing and giving teaching to medical students, and more informal ones alongside, you know, with my running my mess for my university, for my hospital and things. In terms of the papers, the reason I was able to get 6 papers out of it was partly because I was finishing off projects I'd already been working on, and they're very, very happy to support you in doing that. Partly because I was willing to pick up all the projects that were near completion. And you'll find this when you start in a new department with research. The most common experience in the world of research is to get 95% of the way to completing a publication. And at that last hurdle, when it's almost there, walking away because you receive all these rejections or these comments from reviewers and you think it's all just hopeless. I sort of hoovered up those rejected papers and polished loads of those papers off and was able to rapidly work my way through, which was useful because obviously in many of these cases you're effectively amplifying the use of your time because you're taking lots of work which you've done before, which would have otherwise never seen the light of day, and making it so it reaches its final fruition and is useful. And obviously I contribute something helpfully which other people weren't otherwise going to be doing. So I personally got the most from completing projects I would already been working on, obviously getting stuck into one main sort of central theme that was to do with my surgical AFP itself, as well as completing the projects already ongoing but not yet completed by the department. And so that's really what I'd recommend. And if you really hit the ground running and if you plan in advance, I'd say you should expect to be getting several papers out of your 4-month block, because it's absolutely achievable. It just requires good time management and clear planning in advance.
Wow, what I'm hearing from everyone is that it's really important to have a plan before you start your 4-month block if you're doing a 4-month research block. So I just have one last question, and I guess it's more for Dimitri and Faris, although Nikki and George do feel free to chip in. I was just wondering about like the opportunities that you might have as an AFP doctor outside of the AFP block. And I know that obviously, Dimitri, that's kind of your situation at the moment. Is there anything in particular that people might look out for when they start their foundation program, but not within that kind of discrete block that you're allocated?
Yes, that's very important. That's a very good point. And that was also one of the reasons why I chose the AFP, because it gives you plenty of time to pursue these other opportunities. So what are they? So it depends. At the moment, for example, I have a day release. So 4 days a week, I go and work as an F1 in hospital, and the other day I have protected to do research. So some programs come with the day release, and you can use that day to your liking, either do research or attend courses or run your own teaching courses, all sorts of things, going to conferences and so on and so forth. If you do have just the academic block at the end, the AFP sort of offers other opportunities depending on the deanery. So some deaneries may give you discount to courses that are given normally to PhD students. Oxford's an example of that. You may get other fringe benefits like a stipend towards conferences. And given that you have applied for an AFP, you probably have started making contact with potential supervisors before the time of your application, so that you have something to talk about in your interview. So sometimes it's easier to start research early, either during your day off, if you do have a day off, or during weekends, or maybe after work. And although this may sound quite hectic, some projects, like some clinical trials, for example, may take up to 4 months, for example, to get research ethics approval. So starting early is always good, so that when you get to your academic block, say in your F2, you have all the ground laid for you and you're ready to go into your academic block. Now, that being said, I ought to mention that I found it extremely difficult to start what I was planning and to get involved into a project 1 month during my AFP. And this is not because of the deanery, this is because of Oxford. Many clinical trials have been postponed. Even basic lab science research has been moving at very slow rates, where principal investigators need to work from home, lab capacity is reduced, no observers, no students, and sometimes only a few PhD students can work at a lab at one certain time. So it is a difficult period of time. This is beyond our control, but this shouldn't discourage anyone from applying to an AFP.
That's great. Thank you so much. Nikki, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that Dimitrios covered some of the really good things that you can do as an F1 as well, alongside your clinical commitments and working life. I think it's, I know I've already mentioned the pandemic already, but it's obviously doing an AFP at the moment is slightly different in general because of some of the things that he's mentioned. So it has been a different experience. But I think just if you think about it on balance, you have extra time in general, whether it's a day release or the 4-month block, that you can use to develop your CV in whichever way you wish to do so. So I'm interested personally in pediatrics, and I don't have a clinical pediatric job, which is something to consider when you're looking at AFP programs, is if you have a particular career interest in mind, just balance that up and see what you would prioritize as well with that, because that was definitely a big consideration that I took into account. And you can even do stuff like that. If you feel like you want some more clinical exposure in a different thing, you can try and do an audit in that specialty. And whilst all F1s and F2s can organize taster weeks, you could use that time. So it's not unique to being an AFP doctor, but I would just say that you have sometimes extra time to do the things that maybe other doctors would also like to do, but they don't have the benefit of that time period that you do. So I just want to highlight that benefit really, and say that it is just having that extra variety and that extra time is such an advantage. And then the opportunity is honestly endless.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. I think we're coming to the end of our time together. So thank you all for joining me today. It's been a really useful discussion for me. I hope everyone watching has also found it useful. And yeah, join us next week when we're going to be discussing a little bit about something that I think everyone finds quite onerous about the Academic Foundation programme, which is AFP interviews.
Hi, so my name's Zaid. I am an F1 in West London, and I just completed the Medics.Academy training in teaching day 3 course.
I think it's structured in a really nice way with a lot of resources. You can permanently access. The course isn't over after 3 days. You've got a ton of online content that you can always revisit, and I think that is fantastic.
I thought it was a great way to learn through having a full day at the start and then 2 later days of self-study. It really allowed for flexibility and allowed us to fully engage in the course.
It also made me feel better prepared to deliver teaching remotely or digitally.
It's really interactive. There's a lot of small group feedback session, exchanging ideas and learning people's perspective.
After actually doing this course, I realised that teaching is more of a science, and it's really important to get clear feedback so that you can improve your teaching.
This course also encouraged me to think thoroughly about what my audience actually wants from my teaching session, and also how I can keep them better engaged.
Really great and fantastic to get such fantastic lectures from experts in the field throughout the 3 days.
It was also interesting to learn from others taking part on the course because we all have different levels of experience, so it was interesting to gain their perspective on things too.
I learned not just about different style of teaching, I also learned about what is medical education, how to build a career in medical education.
Overall, I learned a lot from the teaching course.
I think it's a really well done course.
I really enjoyed it.
And I really found it very enjoyable.
That's what I thought of the whole course, and I really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it to other people.
So thank you for letting me participate.